Good day, Thomas Jefferson Hour podcast listeners, and as always, thank you so much for listening. Well, we talked about a number of different things this week, didn't we, Clay?
Oh, we talked about my annual trip on the Lewis and Clark Trail. Got pretty serious for a while there. And then we turned to my internationally successful comedy album.
Internationally?
Well, I heard a Canadian bought it.
You got stats on that?
One Canadian, that's international.
Okay, then. Well, it was great fun to talk about it.
And I so appreciate it. I just want to say a couple of shameless things. First of all, you can get the album on Spotify and iTunes and so on. And my new book, Bring Out Your Dead. But also this week, while we sit here, Repairing Jefferson's America is being released by Kohler Books in Norfolk, Virginia. So lots and lots and lots is happening.
That's great. You know, we got a couple inquiries from people in the past week. I don't know if you've had a chance to catch up on the Jefferson Hour email since you got back, but I think 3 individuals, 3 different states, inquired about how they could help you with that process of getting it into the hands of state legislators. So you need to check that.
I will check. I got a note from one of my advisors about it. And so that would give us 8 states where Jefferson Hour lovers are making it possible for every legislator to have a copy. Been getting nice feedback from the legislators who have copies. So that's going on. The book is now out. You can get it from Amazon. The release date is August 10th, which, by the way, is my daughter's birthday. And so that's out. And so that's what's happening. But also the tour, the Steinbeck tour in California for March is on. The Lewis and Clark tour next summer, the usual time. And David, I'm hoping that the Cuba tour will be on. I have some doubts.
Well, no, but that's a long ways away. I would counsel you, sir, to stay optimistic. For people that are interested in that tour and all of your cultural tours, they can go to jeffersonhour.com and get the latest updates and information about them. And it's a place where you can support the Thomas Jefferson Hour, and we so appreciate that. We need it now more than ever. And you can contact us, send in Jefferson or Clay a question at that website. So please visit jeffersonhour.com. And with that, sir, I think it's probably time to go to the show. Any last thoughts?
Yes. I came back from this journey refreshed, renewed, and made aware by all of the people who came on it of how important the Thomas Jefferson Hour is to people. And so,
once again, thanks everyone very much for listening.
Your support of the Thomas Jefferson Hour makes a huge difference. Thank you.
Good day, citizens, and welcome to the Thomas Jefferson Hour, your weekly conversation about all things Jefferson. I'm your host, David Swenson, and this week we are joined by the creator of the Thomas Jefferson Hour, the award-winning humanities scholar and author, Mr. Clay Jenkinson, recently returned from the annual Lewis and Clark tour in Montana, and you're back, and I'm assumed rested and well-tanned and happy, sir.
Yes, all of those things. And I greet you on behalf of the 20 some people that were on this tour. You know, we were very worried about it through the winter and spring, and on several occasions came close to canceling it because of the pandemic. And, you know, we want to practice good social distancing, and we want to conform to the best public health standards. Montana now has a mask order. My daughter and I drove into Montana on my way to the river. And it was interesting because although there was some grumbling, the overwhelming majority of the citizens of Montana were complying with their governor's mask order. And so I think everyone who gathered at Fort Benton for this journey was relieved that it was happening, a little apprehensive because of this pandemic that seems to be striking healthy people like lightning and devastating whole communities. And I don't know that we all felt immediately comfortable, but you get out on the river. There's a lot of social distancing, of course. It's a very healthy environment.
A lot of fresh air.
People began to breathe a little more easily and relax. And by the end of the journey, I saw more transformation from initial anxiety and shyness to relaxation and community than in any of the other tours that I have ever led. It was a really great group, and I thank them for their patience in the face of all of the mixed signals that we've been getting and their perseverance in coming on the journey. It was absolutely spectacular. And Russ and Liz, my good friends from North Carolina, were the hosts. So a few other old friends of great importance to me were on the trip. But it was so satisfying, and I think I speak for everyone when I say we needed it. We needed this time to feel like life will go on. We will be able to work around this thing. Not everything has to be canceled or postponed. That we are going to find methods to continue to live our lives in a satisfying and spiritually fulfilling way, in spite of the craziness of this thing that suddenly descended upon civilization as if out of the blue. It's the most astounding moment of my lifetime, and it's been the most disruptive thing that I think ever happened during my lifetime. And I think that the spirit with which these people came and gave themselves to this experience, we had some extraordinarily important conversations, some of them about Lewis and Clark. There was an enormous amount of laughter and joy. People swam in the Missouri River. We got into the Lochsaw River and spent the afternoon on the final day. The great Nicandry came. David Nicandry drove over from Washington State. He's got himself a little pandemic haircut. He's a long hair now. And he came and he was filled with his usual chortling spirit and tremendous set of insights. We had a debate. He debated Meriwether Lewis one night around the fire. I quizzed him about his new books. He has 2 new books coming. One, an anthology of Lewis and Clark articles that he's written over the past few years, and for which I was able to provide the foreword and my daughter the index, and another, his long-awaited book on Cook's third voyage, the voyage in which Captain Cook died in the Sandwich Islands or Hawaii. So it was great to have him. But you know what I'm about to say. More and more people said to me, "Hey, where's this Swenson? Why won't he come?" And then 2 people actually said to me, "We feel that there is no Swenson. You're a ventriloquist and you do Swenson."
Yeah, we got an email from somebody wanting Joe Ellis to confirm that I really existed, but Joe's never seen me either. So there you go.
I tell people I could never imitate you, but I tell them that
I think you could.
I tell them every year that I invite you to come along, and every year you say, not going to happen.
Yeah.
But they all ask after you, and you have great friends out there, and they're
that's
supporters.
So kind. You know, I have to say now, you always, almost always, every year when we talk about this, you say it's one of my favorite times of the year. You're a lucky man, and I know you know this. You get to do this and go out in nature, and that kind of an experience is always a recharge for human beings, that connection, the nature fix. And a lot of people don't have that opportunity.
For me, I think this was my 17th year, David, and so if you've ever seen the film Same Time Next Year, certainly everyone knows the concept. So I go out there every year and I canoe for 3 days, stay in the same campsites, and then we climb the Wendover Ridge, which is 8 miles with a 3,500-foot ascent. It's really grueling, and the last section of it is hot, and it's sort of this bald mountain that we call the Devil's Backbone. And when you see it, your kind of heart falls to your feet. You realize that you're tired, and now you still have this very significant last couple of very vertical hills to climb. And so I do this every year, and then as I do it, first of all, pure joy. It's the happiest adventure of my year, and I get lots of them, and this is the happiest by far. But I also do a little debate about halfway up that mountain. It's going to sound like I'm joking. I'm not. My body talks to my soul, and my soul talks to my body, and we have a dialogue about ourselves. And of course, I'm usually doubled over, coughing up a lung, but to the extent that I can articulate it, it goes something like this. My body says, you don't treat me very well, but I still am going to get you up this mountain. But you really ought to treat me better. And especially as you grow older, you're going to need me, and I'm going to falter unless you're smarter about me. And so I'm asking you, I've done all this work for you for all your life, every single day. My heart continues to beat. My lungs continue to work. My knees continue to bend. but you're not exactly the most sensitive caretaker of me, and I'm asking you to try harder. And then my soul says, well, look, I get it. I want to live a long, rich, healthy, vibrant life. I want to walk up this mountain 20 more times. So I hear you, but you realize I'm a very busy fellow. And I don't, I count on you. I count on you to take the blows for me and to keep taking my brain and tongue around the world for me. And my body then says, I will, of course. I mean, look, I love it too, but I really am going to ask more of you. And my soul says, and I'm not liking it much either, because if I wake up like with my shoulder hurts in the morning or I'm out of breath, that's not thriving. I want to thrive. And then my body says, well, if you just are like even 10% nicer to me than you usually are, I'll come farther. I'll keep you alive into your 90s if that's what you want. But look, bud, you're probably not going to make 90 unless you start to give more attention to your body. You didn't have to. For the first 60 years, your body was just fine. And you didn't really have to pay a lot of attention to it. But as people get into their 60s, 70s, 80s, their body begins to break down unless you take some extraordinary measures. So I'm urging you to, and this goes on all the way up the mountain. And by the time I get to the top, I've two things. First of all, I'm tired of the dialogue. But secondly, I make resolutions, David. And I think next year, I'm going to be fitter, healthier, more energetic. I'm going to go up without even having to stop. And so that was one part of it. And then I had these conversations with my friend Dennis, who is he's from Sacramento. He's a truly remarkable man. I've known him for years. He came on the trip. We had a long conversation on the day after the trip. And he's talking about, if you want to be an effective change agent in the world, you need to tune up your personal life, your body, your body-mind integration, your spiritual health. You need to tune yourself like a fine instrument. That got my attention in a whole new way. And so I guess my point in all of this is I use this trip for joy, to amuse and teach and entertain and educate others. I use this trip to lead others into places that they probably otherwise would not get into. And I've watched it change people's lives in a big way, revolutionize people's lives. But I also use it as my own annual self-checkup. And I found that very useful. And I always come away with resolution and a small amount of melancholy that it doesn't just happen automatically, that you actually have to work at human mental and physical health. And so you can see for me, it's a very spiritual enterprise. And I would urge anyone listening who wants to do this trip to come next year or the year after or the year after that. I'm going to do it until I can't. And I believe that it is the most important thing that I do, not just because of my pursuit of happiness, but it's the most important thing I do because it allows me to have this little checkup. I go to the doctor once a year and he tells me stuff. But that's not the same as the self looking in the mirror of your life and saying, how much do I still want to do? How vigorous do I want to be? How much discipline am I willing to show? What are the things that I have not given enough attention to in the last year, or for that matter, in the last 15 years? And I think it's exceedingly healthy. And then finally, I learned a lot about Lewis and Clark. There was a woman on this trip named Patricia, and I've never met her. Well, I met her once long ago, and her husband, they were both there. And she asked these amazingly insightful questions throughout the week. Just kind of, she knocked Nicandri's socks off with one of her questions. And others too. We had these two guys, Scott and Mike, who were like a human commentary machine, and we had a range of other people who had extraordinary backgrounds in agriculture, in software, in space dynamics, in education, in business, and they all brought goodwill, good minds, good questions, a spirit of joy, and going back to the beginning of this, a huge sense of relief that in spite of the pandemic, we were able to have that extremely satisfying adventure in Montana and Idaho.
That's great. We need to take just a short break, but we'll return to this conversation in just a moment. You're listening to the Thomas Jefferson Hour. Welcome back to the Thomas Jefferson Hour, your weekly conversation about all things Jefferson. I'm your host, David Swenson, speaking with the creator of the Thomas Jefferson Hour, Mr. Clay Jenkinson. We've been talking about this year's annual Lewis and Clark trip, and I asked you in the last segment about the importance of people connecting with nature, and I'm real big on that, and so was Jefferson.
Yeah, Jefferson was in a certain kind of way. He's not Thoreau. He's not John Muir, but he understood nature with a capital N. You know, he's working from Isaac Newton. By the way, during a pandemic, Newton was away from Cambridge. The famous apple incident occurred, or at least that's how he narrated it, and he started to think about a universal law of gravitation. But he was rusticated, to use the actual Cambridge University term, because of an epidemic, and he was home, and he had this revelation that there is probably an underlying law of gravitation that can be used universally to measure everything. And so he was off and running with his laws of thermodynamics. And so that's nature with a capital N, you know, sort of the God behind nature, or when you open the curtains, the mechanism, the clockwork, the orrery of the planetarium system behind nature, tuning the clock with the transit of Venus, you know, looking at eclipses, predicting the tides, things like that. And so Jefferson loved that nature. And he also loved nature as the sublime, you know, when he goes up on the natural bridge that he bought in Western Virginia, and he said that he had to get down on his hands and knees because it was so frightening, and that he said you get a violent headache by looking down into that chasm.
But he did recognize its importance, in fact, to the point where he bought it, correct?
Yeah, he helped to create the national park idea by preserving the natural bridge, which, by the way, is now a state park and is being much better managed than it was as a private entity. So Jefferson gets it. He's not Thoreau, he's not Muir, but he does get it. And he loved nature with gardening and orchards and his crops. And then he loved this idea of the sublime, that the West was somehow magnificent in a way that would be redemptive for the human spirit. And he sent his protege Lewis out there in 1804, and Lewis was mostly a Jeffersonian, but he also was a proto-romantic. And so many times out there, Lewis falls into kind of romantic reverie. And we went to the Great Falls. We went to the Great Falls in the city of Great Falls. We took our coach there, and we all got up on this overlook where you look at a dam that's there, but it's a tastefully done dam that in some sense makes you still get the sense of what the falls must have been like. And then I quoted from the famous entry on June 13th, 1805, where Lewis talks about it and says that it's second only to Niagara, and maybe not even to Niagara, and that he sees buffalo that have drowned, that are popping over like corks, and the sort of the orgiastic nature of the water, and the eagles flying overhead. And you see that kind of romantic love of the American West, and that's part of what this trip is. You know, we get to places where you can't get any other way. And I remember on the last night up in the mountains, it was we'd had our night. It was a beautiful dinner. We had a Greek meal for everybody. It's the next morning, and I know that in 2 hours we're going to leave and we have to come back to civilization. And I felt sad, of course, because it's so beautiful there. And so I took my chair. You know, we have these lawn chairs, and I moved off under these trees, and there was a breeze. And I sat there for about 45 minutes and just looked up. And these lodgepole pines, David, are just like as straight as a pencil, straight up for 200 feet or 250 feet. And then at the top, they have these, they have these evergreen needles, and the breeze was up there, and they would just sway in this kind of magnificently gentle way. You realize the tree is not a pencil. It's a living reed that has flexibility, that it bends, that it waves, it absorbs rather than just reacts to the wind, and that it dances in a certain way. And I'm watching this and the sky is perfect. And over behind me, I can hear the happy voices of people who have relaxed in this huge way in the course of a 10-day adventure of this sort. And I just thought what you said earlier, I'm the luckiest man alive. No heavy lifting. I'm not out lifting bricks or bales or sacks of potatoes or sugar beets. I'm in the mountains talking about the glories of America with a sort of capital A. And there are people that want to go do this, and it's redemptive. And what I realized out there is that that's America. That there's so much more of America that has nothing to do with Nancy Pelosi and Newt Gingrich, or with red or blue, or Republican or Democrat, or Congress and the Supreme Court, or Donald Trump or Joe Biden, or any of it. That there's so much of America that is beyond, it's lower than, deeper than, more interesting than, richer than, more satisfying than all of the patina, the surface that we've given over to this national madness that we're in. If we all got out to places like that more often and turned off the media and just watched the breeze in the lodgepole pines.
Every time you talk about the Lewis and Clark tour, it reminds me of some time I spent in that part of the world. Years ago, I did a CD called Sounds of Discovery, trying to recreate the sounds and the music that Lewis and Clark would have heard. I really believe that music can sort of transport us in time in a way no other art form really can. And I started by trying to recreate a Lakota society song. Patrick Gass writes this detailed account of these 4 Lakota singers walking through the camp singing this society song. And we went back to these 1912 Francis Densmore wax cylinder recordings of elder Lakotas singing society songs. And then I worked with 2 young Lakota singers, great guys, Dana and Courtney Yellowfat, and we actually went out on the Missouri River and recreated that song in that place. And we did a number of recreations, recorded Jefferson's campaign song, which was called the Gabio, then retitled Jefferson and Liberty, and went on and recorded a young fiddler in the woods and a drum group in the Bitterroot Mountains. And it was just a great experience. And whenever you bring up the tour, it always reminds me of that, and what a beautiful part of the world that is, and how lucky you are to be able to go out there every year on your tour. There are a couple of other things that you've been doing. In fact, you've been getting some rave reviews for a book that you recently published.
Well, I'm unaware of that because I've been out in the woods, but I'm so glad. This book is called Bring Out Your Dead, The Literature and History of Pandemics. I wrote it during the pandemic because I was sheltering at home. A lot of things were canceled. And I thought, I'm going to write a book. And so I did. And it's about a 220-page book, and it consists of 2 parts. The first part is essays on the history and literature of pandemics, going back to Thucydides in the 5th century BC and all the way up to the Spanish flu of 1918, and of course all the way up to our own situation. It looks at literature like the Journal of the Plague Year by Daniel Defoe and Albert Camus' The Plague, and it looks at what happened to the Mandan Indians in the 1780s, and again in 1837, the smallpox that essentially wiped them out. And so I look at a lot of different things, trying to make sense of it, because I believe that if you're just in this moment, it tears you apart. But if you can contextualize it in history and literature, it becomes more understandable and more endurable. And so that was part of it. The second half is a series of essays on the art of reading, or the joy of reading in a distracted time. And I had such fun with those, David, about the people that don't mark their books and people that do mark their books, and a long essay on dictionaries, and an essay on reading Anna Karenina, the only major book that I've read straight through without pausing for a single hour, and so on. And so the book is out. It's called Bring Out Your Dead, The Literature and History of Pandemics.
There's another thing that you've done that I want to bring up quickly, and that's your comedy record, Talking Out of Tights.
Yeah, it's available on the usual things, and you can, if you want a physical copy, it was actually pressed as a as a double album CD. If you want a physical copy, just write to me and I'll autograph one and send it to you. So just to say this much, I'm not in studio with you. I can't see if you're smirking. I know you smirked. I know that you think, you and my daughter and others think, oh my goodness, here we go, a comedy album. What's it next? A Christmas album? And so go ahead and smirk. But I'll tell you this, people who have listened to it.
Yeah, you and William Shatner. You should do a Christmas record. That'd be great.
Yeah, exactly. So here we go. This is what I'm up
you
against.
Set me up. What am I going to do?
I love William Shatner's Christmas albums. I know his Jingle Bells is world class. But my point is that this album is out. It's really not a comedy album. It's sort of
it has a lot of humor in it, and you obviously connected with the audience very well. But it's more like a reflection of you as a humanities scholar, and of course the famous pickle story. This moment of approval from your grandmother.
I never got it. She was.
That's a big psychic event in your life.
Working for the Jenkinson Press as a young man, and some of the crazy things that happened there growing up on the Great Plains, and of course a long, long section on my solo journey on the Little Missouri River, which was one of the greatest experiences of my whole life, and lots of very funny things happened on that journey. So it's a 2-disc album. People can buy the song or the album on Spotify and iTunes and Amazon and all the usual places. I'm really proud of it, as a matter of fact. And you can laugh if you like.
You should be.
But I'm proud of it, and it's but it's also this. I mean, I know this is going to sound kind of nutty, but I've been reinventing myself. We have to. All of us have to now. And so I'm moving more towards being a writer. And less being a traveler, perhaps. I've been moving more towards cultural tours and fewer performances. I'm going to write a novel I've been working on for a couple of years. I want to finish during this time. I have some huge reading projects. As you know, I still need to take up the ukulele, and I'm determined by this time next year I'll be playing a couple of ukulele songs out on the Lewis and Clark Trail. And so I think I've said this to you before, David, but it's so important to me. I saw one of those kind of square greeting cards you get in the high-end greeting card stores, where they have quotations from Martin Luther King and Eleanor Roosevelt and Confucius. And one of them said, "What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail?" I think that's the most important thing that any of us can ask ourselves. What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I think all of us are intimidated by our own insecurities, our own belief that we're no good, or maybe we've been told that we're no good. But what would you do if failure was not going to happen? So, for example, I would paint. I would love to be able to paint. I would love to be able to play the classical guitar. I would love to be able to be a sculptor. There are many things. I'd love to have an orchard where I grafted the trees and produced spectacular peaches and apples and so on. I have a long, long list. And so we don't do the things that we want to do because we're afraid or because we don't have time. But it seems to me that the pandemic has given us this chance to step back and ask ourselves, what do I still want to do? And how can I reinvent myself in the face of this? I know you're having to do it at Makoche. I'm having to do it as a writer-performer. People all over are having to reinvent themselves because people are enormously resourceful, and we must feed ourselves. We must work. And so I'm trying to use this as a time to open my life rather than to begin to close it down. And if that means that I'm in your sick mind, William Shatner, I am willing to be. I am willing to be your William. I'm willing to be your whipping boy.
It's like you could dish it out, but you can't take it.
If that makes you happier,
I know somebody like that. Listen, I'm the one who brought up the record, and I'm going to bring up two listeners who wrote in. Kimberly Rao, who is really interested to get a physical copy of it, and now you know how you can do that. Just contact the Jefferson Hour. Go to jeffersonhour.com. Send us an email. We'll forward it on to Clay. And you can also support the show there. That's another story. We appreciate that. And Teresa Townsend, who had some very nice things to say. She looked for the pickle story, found it, and founded the Jefferson Hour too. So welcome to you, Teresa. And, because of this, it got me to thinking about humor during Jefferson's time. Now, if you had used humor during Jefferson's time, then every criticism I have made, even jokingly, about your CD would be justified. Humor was pretty awful back then, wasn't it?
You know who knew about this was our old friend Joe Musselman from
Oh, yeah.
Missoula, and he did a series of lectures during the bicentennial of Lewis and Clark on the songs of the Lewis and Clark Trail and on the jokes and jests of the Lewis and Clark Trail. And this wasn't just conjecture. He went back and looked up joke books from the age of Jefferson, and there were such things. There were books,
And they're awful.
and they're not only
Joe
awful,
Miller's
they're not
jokes. That's
funny.
the one that was published in 1739. And you can get it online for free if you want to look around. It's awful. It's just awful.
No, they were just completely horrible and pathetic and banal and unfunny. And Jefferson himself is unfunny. So, and I discovered a number of years ago that when I perform as Jefferson or Meriwether Lewis or Steinbeck or whoever it is, I do a lot of humor. And I realized I'm really not being very faithful to the character of Jefferson by being funny, because he wasn't.
Actually, I found a couple of examples of Jefferson's humor that I thought were pretty good.
Let's hear one.
Well, the first one involves Jefferson's boyhood friend, his best friend Dabney Carr. And Jefferson supposedly proposed a race between his slow pony and Dabney Carr's fast horse, and proposed that they hold the race on February 30th.
Yes, there's the date that can't happen trick, and Jefferson was part of that. So I do have a belly laugh going on that one. What's your next one?
Well, there's a story related by Ellen Wales Harrison, who was the daughter of Thomas Jefferson Randolph. And Jefferson visited, and Martha Jefferson Randolph had just given birth to her 12th child. And he looked at her and said, "My dear, we shall have to send you back to the convent."
Wow.
There are numerous accounts of him having a sense of humor. Even John Quincy Adams was quoted as saying, "Mr. Jefferson tells large stories. You can never be an hour in this man's company without something of the marvelous like these stories." And Francis Few in 1808 wrote about Jefferson saying, quote, "I dined with the president. He is a tall, thin man, very dignified in his appearance, but very agreeable in his manners. His face expresses great good humor. There is scarce a wrinkle on his brow. He seems very happy."
Yeah, I have a real Jefferson joke. Do you want to hear it?
Yeah.
A young man wrote to him and said, "There are 155 members of the Congress of the United States, and yet so little gets done. Why is that, sir?" And Jefferson wrote back and said, "Young man, whenever you gather 150 lawyers into one room at one time, nothing good can come of it. These are, after all, men who are paid to talk by the hour."
Even then, lawyer jokes. Here's another one. Two county attorneys overtaking a wagoner on the road and thinking to break a joke upon him asked him why his forehorse was so fat and the rest so lean. The wagoner, knowing them to be limbs of the law, answered that his forehorse was a lawyer and the rest were his clients. Even then, lawyer jokes. So there was humor, but it was a little different.
See, that's the thing. I've actually worked on this in the course of my career, and I put in the margin of all the books that I read, including books of Jefferson's letters and so on, I put H. I put an H in a circle if I think it's maybe humor. And so I've got probably 100 examples, but when you read them, you're not sure he didn't just mean it. So here's one that he told Abigail Adams. He said, she asked him why, what he thought of the British system, and he said, "I find that it is not in their parliaments, but in their gastronomical tracts that they are to be reformed. The sheer quantity of animal flesh that they eat renders them insusceptible of civilization." Is that a joke, or does he mean it?
I'm guessing it's probably a bit of both. Anyway, sir, we need to take a short break, but we'll return to this conversation in just a moment. You're listening to the Thomas Jefferson Hour.
Welcome back to this special edition of the Thomas Jefferson Hour, the so-called humor album, the comedy album edition, talking with my friend, the semi-permanent guest host of the Thomas Jefferson Hour, David Swenson. David, out on the Lewis and Clark Trail when we sat around Eagle Camp, someone raised her hand and said, "What's this thing about the semi-permanent whatever that thing is?" And I said, "Look, it's true. It's not a joke. It's become an amusement." But I said, when I moved back to North Dakota, About 16 years ago, I walked into Makoche and I said to David Swenson, whom I knew a little, I said, I want to work with you. And you said, well, let's talk further. And then a few weeks later, I said, I, you're aware of the Thomas Jefferson Hour. I don't want to do it with a remote host. And I just wonder if you would be willing to be the host for a while. And as we move from sort of the Reno edition of the Jefferson Hour to the North Dakota edition. And David said, of course, I don't want to be permanent. So I'd be glad to be a guest host for a while. Let's do that. And so I said, that's how it started. And so he was a guest host. And
well, that's not quite how I remember it.
Let's hear your version of it.
I believe it was your excellent handler, Nancy, who said, well, we'd like you to just fill in for a little while till we find a permanent host. That's the way I remember it.
No. We were not looking for someone better. We just assumed that you had a life. See, I am funny.
You made me laugh.
Yeah, I made you laugh. So Let me tell you a joke. Let's each tell each other a joke. I'm not good at jokes. In fact, I'm terrible at jokes. But here's one. Horse walks into a bar. Bartender says, why the long face?
And?
That's it.
Okay, do you know why there are no knock-knock jokes about America?
No.
Because freedom rings. There are a couple of questions that might fit into this now that we've kind of completely gone off the rails. We got a question from Joe Cannon, and it actually is addressed to President Jefferson. He says, I have an unusual question that I don't think you've been asked before. In our time, it has been said that in June 1800, you received a report from astronomer William Dunbar of a glowing object in the sky the size of a large house. Do you know anything about this?
I'll tell you what little I know. I know about William Dunbar because he later led an expedition on Jefferson's behalf, Hunter and Dunbar's expedition up the Washita River. He was a naturalist. He was an astronomer. He was a figure of the Enlightenment. He knew something about Indian languages, and he knew a great deal about the borderlands that are now East Texas. And he became Jefferson's go-to guy for knowledge about the Southwest at the time. And Jefferson always was asking him questions about how the Spanish were reacting to the Louisiana Purchase and, whether there was room for us to expand west into Texas and so on and so forth. And he was an expert, as I said, in Indian ethnography. I don't remember hearing about this UFO. UFO is kind of the wrong term, but whatever this thing was, but didn't it go? It became a transaction of the American Philosophical Society, didn't it?
It did. And actually, Dunbar, who was 50 at the time and a member of the House of Doofus, went and tried to find the location and wrote that he'd been informed that the search has been made in the place where the burning body fell and that a considerable portion of the surface of the earth was found broken up and every vegetable body burned or greatly scorched.
Sounds like a meteor or a meteorite. Did you say the House of Doofus?
I did.
We're still in the comedy.
No, it's a fact. Unfortunately named House of Doofus, it was referred to as. So
I have a question for you, and this is a serious question. Do you believe that there are UFOs?
That's kind of a loaded question. No matter how you answer it, you're wrong. So I'll refrain from answering that and divert to something else extraterrestrial, and that is a new pandemic sport that we're practicing at our house. And it's great fun, and that's tracking and watching the International Space Station. Now, if you've got a smartphone, you can go to the App Store and look for an app called Satellite Tracker. It's free. And what this app does is tells you when the International Space Station will be flying over where you live. Gives you times and all these things. And it's just great fun. And you really can see it. I mean, it just zooms across the sky, takes 8-9 minutes. So I would encourage people to try this out. Again, the free app is Satellite Tracker. It tells you right when it's coming over. And it's just great fun, sort of a pandemic sport we've developed around our house.
Let me ask my question again because you ducked it.
What?
Do you believe in UFOs.
In unidentified flying objects? In what sense? Things that are
Do you believe that
unidentified, or
there
do
are
I believe in alien life forms?
Do you believe that alien life forms send ships, vessels of some sort that are occasionally seen by humans?
That's one of those questions that they would ask you in an interview if you were running for office, so they could go, see, look, you know. Um, so let me answer it a little more diplomatically. I do not disbelieve that, but I have absolutely no scientific proof that I can go to that proves to me beyond a reasonable doubt that that is a fact, although I'm open to hearing it. How's that? I should have run for office, right?
It's not too late. You can get on the ballot.
Well, I don't know what this is leading to. You've been on the road too long, perhaps, or something, but I guess to play along, I must ask you the same question as well.
I believe that there are cosmos after solar system, after universe, after galaxy in every direction, and that statistics alone teach us that there are other planetary systems and that the life force almost certainly cannot be unique to Earth. That's an arrogance and an absurdity that I think it belittles the very idea of the universe and aggrandizes us unnecessarily. That said, I don't believe that there has ever been a verifiable sighting of a vessel from another place, and I'm not certain that they would find us very interesting or would want to probe us in all the ways that they seem to in UFO sightings. But I do believe that we are not alone in the universe. We talked about this on my trip, this raises a very, very large number of enlightenment questions. And here's one of them, David. If there's life, let's just say that there are parallel planets in every direction, and that life is maybe not identical to ours, but it's recognizable. Does this mean that God created them all, but the only one that needed Jesus is ours? It creates a whole series of problems about the resurrection, about grace, about God's intentions for the earth, about Noah's flood. Does he have a particular interest in this one little planet and the others are thriving, which is possible? Or did he have to do the same salvation in every one of them? Or is this a myth that doesn't have any truth value of any sort? Or is it metaphorically valuable, even if it's not physically verifiable? This was the problem of the Enlightenment. When they met American Indians, they thought, they had no way of knowing Christ. They are completely from a different tradition. Are they saved? Are they damned? Are they humans in the same sense that Germans and Italians are humans? Are they a different Genesis altogether? Does God have a different intention for them? Were they part of the fall? Were they part of the ones saved on Noah's Ark? And it sounds like I'm being glib and belittling these things. I'm not. These were extremely serious, sober, anxiety-producing questions of the Enlightenment, which is, what do you do when you encounter the other, and the other wasn't part of the equation of how you saw the history of the earth and its destiny unfolding? And so now, if there are life forms on other planets, I wonder what they're like. I hope they don't have the reptilian brain. I hope they graduated beyond the reptilian brain, whereas we have not entirely done it yet. If they're technologically superior, I wish they would come and teach us a few things. We could really learn from them. Of course, we would be scared out of our minds if we were visited by life forms from another place, because we've been taught all of our lives that they're likely to be hostile. It's a whole interesting thing, but statistically, I'm with you. It would be a very significant waste of the cosmos, of the universe, to think that one puny little planet in a minor solar system at the far edge of a minor part of the Milky Way was it. And so,
well, we brought up this question from this listener about, Dunbar and Jefferson. So you're the Jefferson scholar. Do we have any indication in any of Jefferson's writings about matters such as these?
No, but Jefferson did agree with Buffon, the great French scientist and naturalist, that the Earth was much older than the biblical account of it. And so that was a breakthrough, because for many centuries, for millennia, scholars and chronologists had tried to ascertain how old the earth was by beginning at Genesis and counting the generations. And so you have Methuselah, and you have Noah, and you have Abraham, and you have Saul, and you have Jesus, and you have Paul, and you have so on. And they were trying to figure out how old the world was because they accepted the chronology as it was produced in the Bible. And Bishop Ussher of Ireland actually said that the moment of creation, and he actually specified the day and the time, but it was in 4004 BC. And so that was regarded as orthodox and definitive. Well, Buffon was a brilliant man, and he realized that can't be true, that it's much older than that. And so he wanted to open the window to what we might call deep time or indefinite time. And he posited maybe 60,000 years old, maybe much older, maybe a million. But he tried to be very cautious in his publications because he knew that there would be those who would be appalled by speculation that the biblical chronology was inadequate or in error. And so this was a serious debate that was going on during the Enlightenment, and Jefferson is part of it. He quotes Buffon extensively. He quarreled with Buffon over Buffon's degeneracy theory. And by the way, I was at Buffon's Jardin de Roy in Paris in November when I took that cultural tour there, and I went on one of my private days and saw the statue of the great Buffon, and I felt deep respect and reverence for him. But Jefferson was on top of all this, and he believed that the earth was much older than the biblical account too, but he didn't really understand geology, Jefferson, and he certainly wouldn't understand cosmology today, where people are literally saying that there might be 30 universes that coexist in the same zip code, but they don't talk to each other. I mean, that would, for Jefferson, would just be metaphysics. And I can tell you that he would be very, very, very curious about the sighting of a house-like object in Dunbar's world down in Louisiana, but he would also be just kind of automatically skeptical.
There's one more letter I wanted to get to this week, and it comes from Kay Suni Crowley Coleman, who works at WMBG Radio in Williamsburg, and she's writing about the program that we did just recently about the plague of 1793 and the yellow fever. She writes, as most often in your discussions, I, the listener, find myself asking questions about the condition of mankind these days. Curiously, I have often believed that time and conditions may change, but mankind often stays the same. More simply put, from one generation to the next, we continue to repeat the same behavior as if our history never stays with us. In the midst of this horrid virus, some go about their lives with a casualness and a lack of consideration for their fellow man. Free country, yes. Freedom to choose what you think, where you live, and even where you wish to die. All that said, living in a civilized society with all its benefits and in-place protections to the masses comes individual responsibility. Living in Williamsburg, Virginia has been one of the smartest moves I could have made. Generally speaking, people are kinder here, more respectful, and take this pandemic very seriously. Our state motto is, Virginia is for lovers. Perhaps a more appropriate revision to this motto might be, Virginia is for civil consciousness. Again, that's from Kay Suni Crowley Coleman.
Yeah, wonderful. I will respond to her. We so appreciate that. And I do think that this is a time when we need the Founding Fathers because they were clear-headed, most of them, and they set down the framework for a successful society, and that framework has worked brilliantly well, and it's showing signs of unraveling at the current moment. And I think that I'm going to be reading more books about the last days of the Roman Republic in the weeks and months ahead, because I think that, I'll say this much, and I don't want to get into the usual political wrangling, but I don't think ultimately this is about Donald Trump. I think this is about the unraveling of America, of which Donald Trump is one of the icons or one of the symptoms. And so I think that the country has lost its way. I think maybe we're recapitulating some of the ways in which republics fall apart when they get too rich and too expanded and too indifferent. And part of it is having not controlling your borders very well. And so I think we need to be really thoughtful about this, and we need to learn more. The founding fathers were as good as they were, David, because they were deep readers of the history of government, particularly Athens in the 4th century and the Roman Republic from around 520 BC until around 20 AD. And that gave them an understanding of how governments thrive and how they fail and what can go wrong. And one of Jefferson's very favorite books was Tacitus. And Tacitus was a kind of a chronicler of how the Roman Republic collapsed into a world of tyranny and private armies and insanity and base corruption and bread in circuses and indifference and so on and so forth. And so I think that she's right, that history matters. And so our history greatly matters, and Williamsburg is one of the places where that's best done. And in turn, we now need to look to the British history going back to Magna Carta, and we need to look at the ancient world, and we need to gain all of the insights we can. And it might not be too soon to start looking at the French Revolution, because some of the things that have been happening in the United States since the death of George Floyd have looked to me like what could be the beginnings of something like the French Revolution. I hope not.
Very good, sir, and thank you for an enlightening conversation, although it was a bit light at times, and it was great fun. Good to talk to you as always, and welcome back, and I'm glad you are safe and your daughter as well. And with that, sir, I shall bid you goodbye for the week.
I think light is good. Humor is good. I wish Jefferson were funnier than he was, but that's the nature of Thomas Jefferson. He had other gifts, but if we want to talk about humor, someone on my trip said we should be talking about Theodore Roosevelt from time to time on this show, and there was a man with a sense of humor. So thanks to all of you. We'll see you next week for another exciting edition of the Thomas Jefferson Hour.
The Thomas Jefferson Hour is brought to you each week by Dakota Sky Education. The program is distributed nationally by Prairie Public. President Thomas Jefferson lived from 1743 to 1826, and this program presents his views. President Jefferson is portrayed by the award-winning humanities scholar and author Clay S. Jenkinson. To obtain a copy of this or any show for a $12 donation, please call 701-575-0727. This program is also available online at jeffersonhour.com and on Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to correspond with President Jefferson or submit a question for him to answer on the program, please visit the website at jeffersonhour.com. The Thomas Jefferson Hour is produced at Makoche Recording Studios in Bismarck, North Dakota. Bach Cello Suite No. 3 in C Major by Stephen Swinford. Thank you for listening. Please tune in again next week for another thought-provoking, historically accurate program through the eyes of Thomas Jefferson.